Evil Lyn was never just another name in the long roster of Masters of the Universe villains, and even the latest depiction of her in the new Masters of the Universe reboot proves that. She truly is the shadow that thinks ahead and the quiet storm standing just behind the thunder. Introduced as part of the iconic Masters of the Universe toy line and brought vividly to life in the animated series He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Evil Lyn was created to bring something the Evil Warriors were sorely missing: a female presence with real menace, ambition, and intellect. As the only female member of the Evil Warriors, Evil Lyn is often underestimated, but she is a powerful evil witch who wields dark sorcery like a sword in service of Skeletor, acting as his second-in-command. But loyalty has never been her defining trait. Where Skeletor is driven by rage, obsession, and brute force, Evil Lyn is guided by her patience, calculation, and long-term vision. She's openly more intelligent than Skeletor's other followers, and unlike them, she doesn't blindly worship her master. This girl has always been a survivor and a strategist, and that's why, over the years, these qualities have helped Evil Lyn evolve from a classic cartoon villain into a favorite character, whose influence extends far beyond simply serving as Skeletor's minion. In today's video, we'll discuss her powers throughout the entire Masters of the Universe franchise, including from the latest movie that has all of us in a chokehold.
I have the power.
How powerful is Evil Lyn in the Masters of the Universe franchise? Evil Lyn has been very consistent in her appearance as a villain in the franchise. She's always been fully aware of the power gap she shares with Skeletor, and has made sure to admit it without any shame. But her acknowledgement of that was not out of submission, but rather strategy. Evil Lyn never had any illusions about the limitations of her power, but her goal has always revolved around claiming Skeletor's power for herself and rule all of Eternia, and that ambition sets her apart from every other He-Man villain. In fact, she has more than often operated independently without Skeletor's knowledge, and pursued her own alliances, schemes, and experiments in dark magic. You'd be surprised to know the amount of storylines across comics, animation, and later reboots where Evil Lyn has blatantly betrayed Skeletor to serve her own agenda, thus proving time and again that her loyalty and allegiance is always conditional. This inevitability makes her unpredictable and very dangerous, as compared to anyone else working for Skeletor. Now, Evil Lyn is best known for her signature magic wand that is topped with a crystal orb, and this iconic accessory really reflects her authority as a powerful sorceress. However, unlike many spellcasters who rely on magical artifacts, Evil Lyn typically channels her powers through her own force of will by casting spells, unleashing energy, and manipulating dark magic without relying on any external aid. Of course, she's a very powerful witch, but these abilities make her stand out as the most naturally gifted magic users in this franchise. Behind the scenes, Evil Lyn first appeared in 1983 as part of the Masters of the Universe toy line, but she was actually created to add a female character to the Evil Warriors and to serve as a dark counterpart to Teela. In fact, her original action figure reused much of Teela's body mold, with only minimal changes made to the head sculpt, color palette, and accessories in order to create a distinctly villainous look. The early concepts even envisioned Evil Lyn as an evil warrior goddess, further emphasizing her role as Teela's visual and ideological opposite. What really stood out in the details of her original figure was her bright yellow skin, and that design choice truly made her eye-catching on toy shelves. However, as time passed, most comic and animated depictions started portraying her in more natural tones, with pale or olive skin, which helped to ground her character while also retaining her mysticism. But over the years, Evil Lyn has evolved to become much more complex in nature, as the modern interpretations of the Masters of the Universe adaptations have explored her character in greater depth in order to highlight her intelligence and ambition, alongside her frustration at being constantly underestimated. Not just that, her character has always been torn between her loyalty to Skeletor and her desire to find her own footing. Some versions even show her questioning the endless struggle between good and evil in order to add more layers of complexity, making her one of the franchise's most compelling characters. At her heart, Evil Lyn is driven by ambition and a sharp, calculating mind. She's never been satisfied with standing behind someone else, whether it's Skeletor, Destiny, or the expectations placed upon her. Even in the latest Masters of the Universe movie, we got a hint of how patient and strategic Evil Lyn's character is. She clearly prefers to watch and learn, and is definitely waiting for the perfect opportunity to make her own move. It's always been the trajectory of her character because Evil Lyn never intended to become someone else's subordinate. Rather than being the servant of darkness, Evil Lyn has always wanted to claim Eternia as its queen.
The fearful feline speaks the truth.
Evil Lyn's main power comes from blue crystal magic. So in the early Masters of the Universe mini-comics, and yes, I'm indeed talking about those slim story-packed booklets that quietly shaped the darker spine of the franchise, Evil Lyn was depicted with her distinct yellow skin, an otherworldly visual cue that immediately emphasized her connection to forbidden magic and arcane forces beyond the normal Eternian norms. Even if she was one of many among Skeletor's disciples, you could tell that she was very different. In fact, none of the other evil warriors were powerful sorceresses like her, and while most of them relied on brute strength or blind loyalty, Evil Lyn always made calculated decisions that furthered her own ambitions. Now, the most significant weapon that she has used across almost all of her depictions is her magical staff, topped with a crystal orb. This weapon helps her channel her arcane powers and focus them on her opponent for maximum assault. In the mini-comics, Evil Lyn explicitly referred to the energy she channeled through it as blue crystal magic, and this distinctive form of sorcery visually and thematically distinguished her powers from Skeletor's raw and chaotic spellcasting. The crystal staff here is used as a conduit to amplify her pre-existing magical abilities. We also see it in the new Masters of the Universe movie, where Evil Lyn cites spells to channel her magical abilities, and then uses the blue orb on her staff to channel that energy. Even when she fights with Teela or Adam in the film, Evil Lyn never uses brute strength, and instead the power channeled through the orb to stop them from attacking her. But she could overpower Adam only to a certain extent, because once he really embraced the true power of Grayskull within him, Evil Lyn was overpowered in mere seconds. In fact, I think it's going to be Evil Lyn's blue crystal magic that will be responsible in reviving Skeletor's lifeless skull back to his full form. Evil Lyn's god-level power upgrade once turned her into Dark-Lyn. So by the end of Masters of the Universe Revelation Part 1, Evil Lyn sort of betrayed us all by derailing her redemption arc. She'd almost become a hero while working with Teela in order to return magic to Eternia and bring Prince Adam back so he could become He-Man again. Unfortunately, Skeletor then ended up using her to resurrect himself as a god, thus leading to the unraveling of the epic chaos in Part 2. However, through the course of the next 5 episodes, Evil Lyn ended up having a major power-up, which was sort of the show's best arc, as she finally decided to no longer be a pawn of anyone else's schemes. After Skeletor became Skelegod, he admitted that he had used Lyn's body to store his soul so that he could resurrect again when the time was right, and steal the power of Grayskull for himself. For that, he repays her by turning her into the new sorceress, but also makes it clear that this is not a gift, but a curse. Because the castle needs her as a guardian, this basically means that she can never leave it. This new responsibility basically made her a prisoner of the castle, especially because she never knew what Skelegod was signing her up for. Evil Lyn was now his conduit. She was an instrument to channel the power through him and unlock the secrets of the cosmos for her lord. However, Beastman of all people gave her a much-needed pep talk on liberation and reminded her that given her history of rising from the trenches since the very beginning, the universe is truly her limit. This is what helps Evil Lyn understand that she doesn't need Skeletor, he needs her. So, in order to turn the tide in her favor, Lyn ends up seducing Skeletor only to steal the Sword of Power, strip him of his abilities, and become Dark-Lyn, the new goddess of Eternia. It surely is a corrupt, power-hungry move, but still nuanced as she's never had agency. Throughout the series, we saw Lyn lose her home after her impoverished parents tried to kill and eat her on her 5th birthday. She then became a runaway in the slums and a perennial target for men. Even when Skeletor rescued her, he made her a slave, and that's why she sees this as karma for her enemies. She believes that she's earned her newfound powers. But you should know that Lyn's destructive ways were not exactly self-serving, because after gaining her all-seeing and all-knowing powers, she peered through history, space, and time and saw nothing but chaos that was wrought by all of humanity. That's why she wanted to go full Thanos on all reality, because according to her, this resetting was the only way to bring order. Of course, this is all a repercussion of a needy and obsessive Skeletor who's broken her with his toxic ways, and now led to the birth of this interdimensional goddess who wants to usher in peace in a violent manner. The story really helps you understand why she became a villain, And it's even more scary because her unresolved trauma makes her even more intimidating and powerful, which draws Skeletor to form an alliance with He-Man after he escapes her wrath. Coming to the details of Godlyn's full cosmic promotion, her powers basically go from a pretty strong witch to a Grayskull-charged sorceress goddess. Harnessing the powers of the sorceress and the sword changed Dark-Lyn's physique, and she upgraded to more of a warrior goddess silhouette, with broader shoulders, a more muscular torso, pretty defined abs, a taller and more regal posture, glowing eyes, white short pixie hair, and an ornate blue and gold armor with a dramatic cape and skirt. This, power-wise, is the definitive peak version of Evil Lyn, because after harnessing the power of the sword, she could blast and command a colossal amount of magic, defeat both He-Man and Skeletor in battle, kill Panther, transform Beastman, and even raise the dead. She later summoned Scareglow and the Subterranean army, which proved that her magic was no longer just witchcraft, but a battlefield scale of reality warping power. I think the highest point of Dark-Lyn's power came when she tapped into the celestial apex, which is basically the alignment of all the planets. That's why her powers threaten the very fabric of the universe. Weaponized grief is truly the most lethal tool in any arsenal. Or why else would Lyn tap into the celestial apex and decide that the universe was meaningless and the only way to ease suffering is by destroying creation itself? Luckily, Teela ends up becoming the new sorceress and creates the opening that the other heroes need. After a special celestial alignment makes Lyn even stronger, Teela takes her to the beginning of time and shows her the raw beauty of creation. She finally talks Lyn down from destroying the entire cosmos by making her realize that a life of love is indeed beautiful and magical. This encourages Lyn to come back and help restore Eternia. After the undead are banished back to the afterlife, Lyn makes her amends by rescuing Orko so he could stay with them rather than return to Subternia. She further atones by burying her signature wand to leave behind her old life and go deep into Eternia's forest as a loner. At the end of Revelation, Lyn finally realized that she had a lot of inner healing to do, as she had inflicted a lot of damage with her warped view of the world, and because she was a victim driven by her revenge, Lyn had a lot of self-reflection and self-actualization to do. But finding her light at the end of a dark tunnel helps bring her story to a full circle, and I truly love that dynamic arc for her.
Its utter destruction is an absolute must!
Evil Lyn is one smart cookie. But when I say that, I'm really just trying to find a lighter way to describe the depth of Evil Lyn's strategic intelligence, because her magical abilities are sort of overshadowed by her treacherous, self-serving nature. Throughout the mini-comics and the Filmation series, Evil Lyn's loyalty has always been conditional, so she always aligned herself with Skeletor simply for the opportunity to pave herself a better path to power. That ambition sort of reached a critical point when Evil Lyn ended up betraying Skeletor to join forces with Hordak, who was the ruthless leader of the evil horde. She's basically always ready to realign herself with a greater power by trying to sell everyone of her belief that her intelligence and magical skill would make her a valuable ally. But Hordak saw through her immediately, as he had no interest in allying with Evil Lyn and outright rejected her offer. He didn't care for someone whose ambition rivaled his own, and more importantly, Evil Lyn's shifting loyalties would mean that he could always become her next target. I think the mini-comics version of Evil Lyn sort of laid the foundation for everything the character would go on to become throughout the franchise. It's safe to say that being Skeletor's lieutenant was really just a compromise for her, because she was a proto-mastermind who never stopped testing her boundaries of allegiance and power. I think the Filmation cartoons sort of made that even more obvious because they designed her character to be more brain than brawn in the series. And given that all of Skeletor's minions were dumb as hell, Evil Lyn was just far more intellectually superior to all of them combined. Moreover, you could always feel the uncomfortable notion of Evil Lyn's relationship with Skeletor, because she persistently looked for a chance to overthrow him and claim his power as her own. This underlying threat gave every shared scene between them an edge because Skeletor might have commanded the throne at Snake Mountain, but Evil Lyn was always eyeing it. We see her work independently in the cartoon to pursue her own goals of conquering Eternia, even going as far as recruiting Skeletor's minions or henchmen to carry out her personal schemes. She absolutely loved bossing them around, and unlike most He-Man villains who relied on brute force, Evil Lyn preferred to apply strategy, manipulation, and timing to get her own way. Not just that, she used her wit to occasionally ally herself with other powerful villains of Eternia, including Gorgon and Dark-Lyn, in order to further her ambitions through temporary partnerships. Still, when her schemes inevitably collapsed, as all evil plots in the show do, Evil Lyn would always return to Snake Mountain and once again seek shelter under Skeletor's protection, but only after manipulating him into taking her back. And in order to survive the dark underbelly of any world, you gotta be a smart cookie. Even in the 2026 film, we see Evil Lyn say just the right words to air Skeletor's ego and stay in his good graces, while he constantly keeps putting her down.
Desert winds at my command wrap this place in clouds of sand.
Evil Lyn has the ability to use her magic to disguise herself. So Evil Lyn's shape-shifting abilities can be confusing because they vary between different Masters of the Universe continuities. But the important thing to understand here is that she's not a natural shapeshifter like Mystique from Marvel. Instead, she uses powerful sorcery, illusions, glamour spells, and magical transformations to alter her appearance. Basically, Evil Lyn's magic allows her to change her facial features, body shape, clothing, voice, and her apparent age. She creates magical disguises that are convincing enough to fool ordinary people and even experienced warriors. Not just that, she can also conceal her magical aura from being detected by other magic users. Evil Lyn can also project illusions over herself to make others perceive her as someone else. In fact, sometimes she could transform into entirely different beings through her spells or magical artifacts. In the Filmation series, Nadira was one of her most famous disguises, as she transformed herself into a beautiful, innocent peasant girl in order to gain the trust of Eternia's citizens and manipulate the events from within. As Nadira, she not only changed her skin tone but also softened her facial features and simplified her clothes. Then, in Masters of the Universe Revelation, Evil Lyn disguised herself as an elderly woman called Majestra, and used it to hire Tila, who was now working as a mercenary, in order to steal the goblet back for her from Snake Mountain. When they succeeded, Majestra promised to double their pay if they helped her deliver the goblet to Castle Grayskull. That's when Evil Lyn revealed the goblet's true form, which is the ram-shaped skull that used to be the head of the Havoc Staff, and then used it to strengthen the magic of the extremely weak sorceress. Here we barely recognize her because as a Majestra, she was practically old, frail, and the change in her voice even fools Tila. In Revelation, she also used her shaping staff to disguise herself as Clawful, while Skeletor disguised himself as Spikor to infiltrate Castle Grayskull. I mean, at that point, Evil Lyn became the anthropomorphic crab-like warrior, so it's definitely something. Finally, in the 1987 live-action film, Evil Lyn magically appears as the deceased mother of a young woman named Julie, just to emotionally manipulate her for her own gain. Even if the latest Masters of the Universe film doesn't depict Evil Lyn as a shapeshifter, I'm sure any future sequels will definitely see her utilizing this ability.
By the forces of evil and magic unbound.
Evil Lyn can also manipulate the weather to her whim. Now, I don't know if you remember, but in the Curse of the Spellstone episode from the 1983 Filmation series, Evil Lyn helped Skeletor steal the Spellstone, which was a magical orb tied to the Temple of the Fire People. The artifact's power was mainly weather control, and once Evil Lyn got access to it, she used it to intensify a violent storm over Eternia. That is the core of her weather manipulation feat, as she was not just standing next to the storm, but actively channeling the Spellstone to weaponize the weather. She uses that power to induce chaos and fear, which helps Skeletor's larger plans by distracting the heroes and destabilizing the royal household. While the storm rages, Evil Lyn disguises herself as an old crone and works the crowd by blaming King Randor and Man-at-Arms for the disaster, so the villagers would turn against them. Secondly, when the confrontation reaches the palace, she unleashes a hurricane-like blast with the help of this Spellstone to throw He-Man and the others off balance in order to buy the villains more time. By manipulating the weather, Evil Lyn can basically create lightning, wind, and panic without having to fight directly, which lets her control the environment while others do the damage. Evil Lyn's Shaping Staff is one of the most powerful weapons in the He-Man universe. So the Shaping Staff is one of Evil Lyn's most dangerous magical tools because it's a transformation device. In the Filmation episode titled The Shaping Staff, Evil Lyn and Beastman discover it in a cave in the Crystal Sea. And once she uses it, we see how the staff can instantly reshape living beings into other forms. Its most important power is a physical metamorphosis, as Evil Lyn uses it to turn Beastman into a copy of King Randor, Randor into a goat, Orko into a cricket, Tila into a frog, and He-Man into an immobile golden statue. That makes the staff a perfect tool for infiltration, sabotage, and battlefield control, because she can neutralize the strongest heroes of Eternia without defeating them in direct combat. Plus, like I said, the staff also helps her cast illusions, as Evil Lyn and Beastman use it while she's posing as Majestra and maintain an entirely false identity long enough to get inside the royal palace. What makes the shaping staff especially frightening is that it appears to handle more than simple illusions. In other words, it can make someone look different, but can also make them function like the new form, such as when it freezes He-Man into a statue or reduces Orko to a cricket-sized creature. It definitely helps Evil Lyn deceive everyone around her, which was already something she enjoyed. Evil Lyn also has mind-controlling abilities. Now, Evil Lyn's ability to teleport is one of the classic Filmation version's most useful battlefield tricks. In fact, she can not just teleport, but use that ability offensively and opportunistically, rather than just for escape. In the episode Journey to Stone City, we see Evil Lyn spot a certain device on a mountain, and she teleports it back to Snake Mountain so she can study it later. That's a good example of how she uses teleportation to steal valuable objects instantly, avoid a long retrieval mission, and always keep the upper hand. Moreover, teleportation also fits her overall style because she was never a brute force villain and has always been famous as someone who loves to sneak in and infiltrate. She often works independently, slips in and out of danger without being detected, and uses her magic to reposition herself to her allies, or steal artifacts when brute strength would be slower or riskier. So in practical terms, teleportation simply lets her bypass guards, escape any retaliation, and show up wherever the heroes would least expect her. However, her mind-controlling abilities are just as dangerous because she can control the minds of others by using sorcery to override another person's judgment, turn allies against each other, or force someone to act in a way that serves Skeletor's plans. That makes her especially lethal in all schemes that need a certain amount of sophisticated deception and manipulation. So, if teleportation lets her move the pieces on the board instantly, her mind-controlling ability lets her bend the players themselves. In the Masters of the Universe Revelation, Evil Lyn could open magical gateways. I think Evil Lyn's gateway magic in Masters of the Universe Revelation is one of the clearest examples of her being someone who was always more than just a standard sorceress. In the episode Poisoned Chalice, after the goblin is revealed to be the top of Skeletor's Havoc staff, Evil Lyn uses it to strengthen the sorceress's magic before the bigger journey begins. The important point is that the staff here is not just a weapon, but a relic that can be used to interact with the borders between realms. In fact, she leaves us all shocked when the heroes travel across the Crystal Sea to the entrance of Subternia, the land of the dead, after Evil Lyn opens a magical gateway using the remaining head of the Havoc staff, which means Evil Lyn is effectively using the artifact as a key to unlock a sealed supernatural passage. That makes her magic valuable even to the heroes, because without the staff's power, reaching Subternia would be much harder, if not impossible. Once they were inside Subternia, Evil Lyn's role becomes much more active, because after the team survives the illusions and dangers there, she later uses half of the Sword of Power to open a gate to Preternia, thus allowing the heroes to escape upward into the realm of the dead's noble afterlife. This is iconic because she's literally opening a realm-to-realm portal between the underworld and Preternia, which basically means that her magic can manipulate the structure of Eternia's cosmic geography itself. What this tells us about Evil Lyn's ability is that she can serve as a portal wielder, but usually only when she has powerful magical focus like the Havoc Staff or the Sword. This means that her gateway magic seems to require a charged artifact and concentrated ritual power, not just a casual spell. This also makes her quite dangerous, as she can use the Havoc Staff to open forbidden routes, move armies between dimensions, and decide who gets in or out of the afterlife. In fact, Dark-Lyn actually did end up calling in a whole army from Subternia, so, there's that. Well, that's going to bring us to the very end of this video. How do you think Evil Lyn will end up resurrecting Skeletor in the next Masters of the Universe movie? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below.